Yeah.
Welcome to the Rhinebeck Scoop. I'm your host, Jennifer C., and I'm dishing out social commentary about our beloved town. If you like this show, please give it 5 stars on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen, and also tell a friend. Today is our look back at the start of the pandemic 4 years ago. Remember, 2020 was supposed to be the year of vision, and it turned out to be the biggest clusterfuck of all time. We're discussing funny pandemic memories today with a special guest, the first guest ever on the Rhinebeck Scoop. Yay! I'm going to clap for that. You may know him as the founder and steering committee chair of Rhinebeck Responds, or the publisher of the Hudson Valley Pilot, or perhaps my nickname for him, COVID Jesus.
Oh, God.
Please welcome Mark Fuerst.
Oh, wow. Really? Okay. Great to be
Mark.
with you. So good to be with you. We met through COVID because I called the bank very soon after the shutdown was announced and talked to Dave Terladay, who I knew because he was my banker. And I told him, you're going to be asked for loans to get businesses through, and I will volunteer to help. And he said, well, somebody else has called the Chamber of Commerce, and it was you. You had called and said you were willing to help. And that's how I first got in touch with you. You reached out, so generous person.
Yes, I try to be. I try to be. So before we start today, I'd like to give a disclaimer. Yes, we will be discussing funny moments of the pandemic, but we all recognize how many people have passed from COVID, are still dealing with long COVID, and or financial hardship or emotional distress due to the pandemic. So let me first take you back in time to 2020 with these 5 dates. On January 9th, the WHO announces a mysterious illness in Wuhan, China called the coronavirus. January 21st, the U.S. confirms its first case. February 3rd, the U.S. declares COVID a public health emergency. March 6th is the first U.S. lockdown or quarantine in New Rochelle, New York. March 11th, the WHO declares COVID-19 a pandemic. So, Mark, do you have any specific memories from that timeline when it first came out?
Yeah, a couple. One is I thought about this. I actually first came in contact with it because I was at a conference in Washington of PBS stations where the Japanese National Broadcasting, which was sponsoring, gave everyone little sanitizer things to put on your... And I was like, wow, this is different. Because it still seemed like something very far off. But coming from Japan, I think they felt it was so much closer. And then the next thing that happens is my daughter comes down with it because my daughter is working selling drinks in a theater in New York. And she had a terrible case. And she stayed in the apartment above my offices because it had been vacated. Somebody left because they went home, and my daughter was there. It was like a prisoner. We gave her food through the door and really wouldn't have contact with her. So you and I talked briefly before about going into stores and seeing empty shelves and all this. But the biggest thing about was my daughter being in my home, and I wasn't able to visit her because she had such a bad case, and we were all so frightened.
My first memory was when I first heard the news, I thought it was bullshit.
Oh.
I was like, this is going to be something that passes in a week, passes in 2 weeks. It's not a big deal. But the irony of the situation was October, November of 2019, I took a trip to Morocco. It was a work trip. I came back and I was so sick. I could not work for 6 weeks. I had to take 6 weeks off of work. I went to the doctor and the doctor said, it's not pneumonia, it's not bronchitis, but we don't know what it is.
Wow.
So I think I got COVID very early. And I also know I have a friend who lives in a Colorado town around January, February of 2019, some strange illness, COVID-like symptoms swept through the town, and then it was gone. It came and it went. I don't know. So I found it a very strange thing. I didn't believe it when I heard it, but then things started to swing into action, right? So, all right, in the first 2 weeks of lockdown, did you party like it was 1999? Everyone partied like it was 1999. How about Jen? How about Matty? Did you guys party like it was 1999?
I didn't initially party like it was 1999. I wound up partying as the time dragged on.
That's interesting.
Yes.
Yeah, that is.
My older son was in DC and his roommate left and he was alone and he was in school remotely. He was working remotely and he was really isolated. They all took it very seriously. So I would say after maybe 3 weeks, he came home. So then I had both of my kids. Then my brother lived in Brooklyn and he was really isolated. And then once we were like all together, that's when the partying started. So we were a little delayed.
Was it break out the Manischewitz, go crazy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's for
Come on,
fun.
that's funny.
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
That's funny.
But yeah, no, but I have to say, like, as it was actually really nice to have kind of like a break.
Yeah.
I know that sounds weird, but it was nice. Like, my kids were already older. And so it was nice to have and my brother, obviously, is older. It was nice to have everybody in one place for a period of time that I'll never have that again.
See, I get that. Like, I'm not into my family like that, but I just had fun with myself. So I just did my own thing. I'm a big introvert.
Yeah.
So
Really,
I'm
you
not
really sound that way on this
I know.
podcast.
I know. I'm a huge introvert. Oh, Mark. So, Matty, how about you? Did you guys party?
I wouldn't say we partied. It was more of just getting used to what was going on and trying to figure out what was going to happen and how long it was going to last. The little tiny part of me that's an introvert was happy for a little while.
Okay.
Contemplating.
Now,
That sounds like Matty.
Now, the problem that you have with this question with me is I really am serious and not that much fun most of the time. So
Okay, that's not even
this only
true.
gave me this tremendous opportunity to be even more serious. Okay. So as I say, my first reaction was to pick up the telephone and say, I'll volunteer to help to write loan proposals from people who might know how to do it so I can keep there. And we start to put Rhinebeck Response together. So that's a pretty serious kind of thing to do. Now, let's also factor in, remember, my wife was ill. She had been diagnosed with a serious cancer. So I already had a big thing going on in my life. And then all of a sudden this new thing shows up. What's my reaction? Oh, I could do even more for other people. So why don't I put some more things on my shoulders? It's like, that was my natural reaction. It's kind of who I am.
Huh.
Yeah.
Interesting. All right. Now be honest.
Okay.
Everyone has to be honest here. Did you hoard toilet paper?
Oh, 100%.
100%. Yes.
I mean, before anyone knew what was happening, I told everyone I knew to get toilet paper.
Wow.
Really?
Yeah. Foresighted.
Well, what happened was I'm a news junkie. So this was all very predictable from February, if you're following it. And then the first CDC official said something on a phone conference call, which, if you were following the news, was a red alert. I mean, if you were following the news, they were shutting down in Italy. They were shutting down all over the country.
Right.
And the idea that that wasn't going to happen here was just absurd. I remember just telling all of my clients, make sure that their voice over IP services were working so that they were going to work remotely. They all looked at me like I was crazy. I said, you're going to close this office in a few weeks. They all afterward thanked me. But at the same time, I remember going to Trader Joe's and stocking up on like $500 worth of food at that moment.
Wow.
And before anyone was there, I remember talking to the person at the register and I said, oh, are people shopping a lot? And they're like, why? Why would they be? I'm like, because maybe they would want to. And that's when I, of course, got tons of toilet paper because that's obviously what always people want in a pandemic.
And water. I bought a lot of water.
I wasn't concerned
just
about
in
water,
case.
but I mean, I appreciate that. But I mean, we have a water filter, so
and rubbing alcohol. I mean,
yeah. A lot of that stuff.
Like, what happens? Like, what happens if there's like a medical emergency? You have to take care of everything yourself. So
all that stuff.
I was
with fucking rubbing alcohol.
Yeah.
Well, what if you had your cat bites you?
You do vodka.
Wow. That's interesting.
I'm not going to waste my vodka that way.
She needs the vodka for something else.
You asked me this question before as we were getting ready. And my recollection is I remember going into a bunch of places and they didn't have any toilet paper. And I kept at it until I found some place that did. I think it was over in Kingston. So I was aware of the fact, wow, this is really happening. I was not, Matt, like you, way ahead of the game. I was like not the last person in, but I was towards the end of the line.
Twitter used to be a fantastic thing for people who wanted news. And if you followed the top epidemiologists, which I did, all of them, they were all sounding red alert on Twitter in February. I mean, it was inevitable and it was going to be bad.
What are you talking about? Twitter was. I love X. I'm on X all the time. It's my favorite thing.
The issue with X is that a lot of the experts have left because of the racism and anti-Semitism and disgusting owner of the platform. So you've lost a lot of the people who are experts that you'd want to follow, and they've gone to other places.
Two other things. I not only was looking for toilet paper, I was looking for hand sanitizer,
Sure.
which was also very, very hard to find.
It became very hard.
Eventually, I was at Home Depot, and there's a type of cleaning stuff for painters and so on that actually was very close to hand sanitizer, and I got a bunch of
No,
that.
I'm just kidding.
Whatever it was. And the other one, which was interesting, is I immediately tried to buy some webcams because I knew we were going to go to doing, and it was nearly impossible to buy a webcam at that time. I looked at every site. I bought one from China. They were really expensive, and they arrived because I had my clients, some of them weren't really equipped to do extended things. All of these things really bang, all of a sudden hit really hard.
Sure.
I would just like to clarify and say I was kidding about X.
Oh, so you're back to that. Okay.
I was completely kidding. I think I was on Twitter for 20 years ago for literally one day.
Oh.
So I'm not into social media or anything like that. So I just want to clarify.
Fair.
Yes. Okay. Because God, all of Rhinebeck would be like putting effigy of me.
You wanted people to contact you.
You should just stick to stick to the first.
You're good.
Now, did you wash off your groceries?
No.
Me neither. No.
Didn't wash them off, but I did leave them outside briefly.
Wow.
But then it became pretty clear that the experts started to say that was not likely to be the problem. Although in Israel, for some reason, because there was a viral video that Israel had put out from their medical establishment, which was all about wiping everything and not touching anything. And it became, why is one country thinking it's the vector and we're not? So it was a little bit confusing if you followed international medical establishment.
I wiped off my groceries. I was neurotic.
You were ahead of it.
I didn't know. That was the thing. Certain things with COVID brought out my natural neuroses because I was really into the wiping off the groceries. I remember my husband started to go grocery shopping because I wouldn't, and then he left them outside. And then I would wipe them off one by one. And I could tell he thought it was ridiculous, but he just let me do it. He just, he didn't say anything, but I absolutely did that. Remember when the U.S. was in love with the Cuomo brothers, Andrew and Chris, and thought they were gods? Mark, I'd love for your...
There's half a dozen that you can find songs created for Andrew Cuomo. There's one that some people, I don't even know where they were. It's such a lovely little tune. In the lyrics of the song, which is based upon a pop tune, talk about how everybody would get together and stop everything in the middle of the day. Because Cuomo came on at noon or 1 each day. And this was a thing that everyone would sit in front of the television and just be mesmerized by our leader, the guy who was helping us through this. And to look at the fall from that spot to where he ends up is astonishing. But Cuomo was, at least in my small circle, oh, wow, Cuomo's really doing it right. And people really did look forward to this, to the point of being willing to write songs to commemorate this moment of him. It was astonishing.
He was the man. Anyone else?
You didn't buy into that?
I couldn't stand him.
Oh, wow.
Ooh,
that's interesting.
Hot take.
I literally called him the progressive Chris Christie. I never could stand him. That's all I can say.
I thought he was pretty good. I thought he was doing the right thing.
For me, I don't watch the news. So news is not my thing. It's a whole thing with me. We won't even go into it, but I just don't watch the news. I get my news in a weekday. On X, on a weekday newsletter called The Daily Skim. It's written by 2 millennial women, and it's supposed to be very neutral. So that's how I get my news. I was not into this whole sitting in front of the TV. I don't even have TV. I mean, I have TV, but I have the apps. I guess you had to tune in on regular TV.
I watch a lot of news on TV, and I was consuming it even more because we had more time.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And I think also Cuomo, and this is not a political radio show. I'm not political, but I think he was seen as, to some people, maybe not to Matty, but to a contrast to Trump.
Totally.
For sure.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. It was definitely, he was benefiting within his circle from his contrast. But he was doing a pretty good job of being articulate and factual about what he was doing. And then it turned out that he wasn't factual, because we found out that actually they didn't do a very good job keeping track of all of the deaths that were occurring in homes. So, he fell really hard.
Yeah, you had said to me this was the greatest political fall, you think, in modern history.
No, but I just for me personally relating to it.
Yeah.
I mean, I wasn't a fan of Richard Nixon or something like that, but I was thinking well of this guy, and then he turns out to be, when it was uncovered as to who he really was. The person I work for worked for Cuomo and said he was the worst person she'd ever dealt with in her life in government, that he was just a horrible person. And then it turns out, yeah, I guess he was. So,
Yes, everyone's taken a big fall. It's funny because I think, obviously you have Bill Clinton, you have Richard Nixon, but I think the more local, modern political gods, like you're saying, Cuomo, I think a big one for me too, not COVID related, was Anthony Weiner. And
there's a good one.
And I'll tell you why. It's because I had lived or spent time in Australia for a while. And they would ask me when I said I was from New York about Anthony Weiner. They thought it was the funniest thing in the world.
It is kind of funny.
That his last name was Weiner. They thought it was hilarious. So I think Weiner has made a big swing and impact.
It was objectively funny.
There you go. So do you like how our country included liquor stores as essential businesses?
Yes.
That is an interesting thing that happened, right?
Yeah.
It's admitting, and liquor stores, because I just go to the liquor store sometimes to get support for the pilot. It is interesting to see how their sales have changed after people were really knocking it down.
Yeah. So their sales have changed, so they're
Down.
not drinking as much.
Yeah, people are not drinking as much.
I mean,
you were home all the time.
To excess, right? Alone and isolated.
Yeah,
There's
that's
not a lot
part of
going
it.
out. They couldn't see people. They couldn't go out and have like a drink.
Yeah.
So people see, I don't drink. So I don't know.
Wow.
But how about Matty?
No, I think it was a good idea. I don't think they had a choice but to make it an essential service. If they had closed the liquor stores, it would have been riots.
I
mean, it would have been like prohibition. It wouldn't have, there was no alternative to that.
That's interesting.
And,
right.
And, as Jen just pointed out, clearly people weren't going to bars. So what they were going to consume had to come from a liquor store. And then, of course, in New York, they did a change in the law that allowed bars and restaurants to allow you to take drinks out, which was never a thing.
That is a good one, Matty, because I remember I would pick up these from Gigi's. They were making these frozen margarita. No, was it frozen margarita?
You were drinking them?
Yeah.
For my husband.
Oh.
And they had no problem with, here you go. It's 11 in the morning. Here's a frozen margarita. Put it right in your car. It's curbside service.
Like New Orleans.
You can't have open containers, I think, of alcohol in your car. I don't think you can. But no one gave a fuck in the pandemic. Yeah. I was driving around with those things from Gigi's for my husband like 2 times a week. So, yeah.
It made sense a lot of drinking is self-medication.
Yeah.
And people need a lot of medication for themselves just to stay calm in what everyone was going through.
Yeah, I'm definitely not judging it.
Yeah.
I wish I could have been a part of it. But unfortunately, my body does not work that way. Mm-hmm. So that's unfortunate. Now, this is I found it funny. I loved it. I was like, see, this is why I think sex work I know I just switched subjects about sex work.
Drinking, sex. I don't think this is.
This is her podcast.
Yeah. This is why I think sex work in about 10, 15 years will start to be more legal.
Okay.
Is because when everyone was freaking out in New York, and you guys remember what was happening, unfortunately, people were dying, people were overloading in the hospital, people on ventilators, and they were trying to find surgical masks. Pornhub donated 50,000 surgical masks to the New York area medics and first responders. And they were the first ones to do it. And I was like, damn, how much money does Pornhub make?
A lot.
Yeah. I'm
sure.
That is a popular thing. That would be fun to do an episode on porn.
Well, let me ask, was there a change in birth rates 9 months after this first closing down? Yeah,
I think
it seems the kind of thing that should have happened because people had more time and maybe a little less stress about work.
And divorces, though, too, after the pandemic.
There were?
Yeah. So it was like a lot more babies because people were fucking.
Yeah,
and then a lot more divorces because people were fighting. So it was just, you had it on two ends.
I mean, they were stuck in a place together.
Yeah,
for too
wow.
long.
Yeah. And you can't get away from one another? Ooh, that's rough.
Yeah, that is rough. 2 of my nieces are COVID babies.
Okay.
So you know what my brother and his wife are doing. So, and they're still together, so they're good.
They weren't fighting.
Yeah. So do you remember these pandemic buzzwords? Ready?
Okay.
PPE,
Oh, definitely.
curbside pickup, social distancing, super spreader, herd immunity, flatten the curve.
Yeah, interesting.
Yep.
All. Yeah.
That brought me back. The one flatten the curve, I had forgotten about that, and that brought me back. And I was like, So how much were you Zooming? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Did you want to meet people in person? How did you feel about that?
Wow. I Zoomed a lot because my business had to go online. We were putting on conferences. That was my job, and conferences were all called off. So we had to reformat everything we did and do them. That's what I'm saying. That's why I was racing around the world to find webcams. I was Zooming much more than I ever want to do the rest of my life. Yeah.
And you were doing it for Rhinebeck Response.
I was doing some for Rhinebeck Response, yeah. Although you never got on a Zoom, as I remember. You did phone calls, but you would not get on Zoom. So I never saw her face for years. We were kind of friends and never saw one another.
And then he saw me and was like, oh my God, I missed out on this beauty for years. Yeah.
So I was doing really a lot. And I got to say, I didn't really like it too much. I don't like Zoom that much. I don't like the fact that you can't see the other part of people. There's so much less communication and physical communication when you're on Zoom versus physically meeting people. And it was one of the great things of my life to be able to be with my colleagues, because I worked with people at a distance, and when we would see one another, it was always like, oh, it's so good to see you.
Yeah.
And that you don't get that feeling on Zoom.
Yeah, that's true. How about Jen?
I didn't do that much Zooming, although I do recall Zooming with my parents for Passover. For the Seder, because my parents are older and they couldn't come.
Yeah.
And so they Zoom. So that was a positive. But I don't really like Zoom very much. And, I preferred phone calls or meeting people outside. I did a lot of walking and a lot of meeting people on porches and benches and things like that.
Well, Zoom was not the Kleenex of web conferencing at that time. Zoom actually became a thing out of COVID, because people were using other platforms that were better established than Zoom. And then Zoom was very inexpensive. I don't miss it at all. And I don't like doing Zoom that much, but it's part of our life now.
I love the reporter. I think he was CNN, who was wearing the underwear and got up. Did you guys see that? No one saw that?
No.
He was hot too. That's why I remember it. He was doing his show, because I saw a clip of it. And he didn't know the camera was still on, and he got up and he was wearing like full boxers and everything. Do you remember that, Matty?
I do remember. Well, there were a lot of things that happened on Zoom that were unusual.
Yes, there were a lot of hearing masturbation and things like that, and so it was a little too much into people's lives, I think.
But it also changed the very way we look at news, because now we find people like losing the signal or sitting in their living rooms talking to you. That was not. People would go to a studio. They'd go to their local affiliate or whatever and do this thing. Now, what kind of stuff do they have on the wall? What kind of place do they have? It's part of what you see now when you're talking to people.
That's a good point. Yeah. And people had set up, Zoom studios almost, and everything's perfect in the background now and looks great. All right. Did you gain the COVID-19? Who got fat? We're all thin people, but.
I definitely did when I wrote to you, because I keep track of my weight every single day, so I have a curve that I can follow.
Hold on. We got to stop there. Okay, we got to stop there. Why do you keep track of your weight? You're thin.
Not what I want to be.
Really?
Yeah, I don't want to make it about me.
Okay.
The answer is yes, and I think I told you it was 13 pounds.
It was 13 pounds. And did you lose it right after?
No. It's an effort to lose weight. I don't know if anybody else has noticed that.
So how did you gain? Okay. So how did you gain it? Just drinking a lot, eating a lot, not being sedentary?
It changed my lifestyle, sort of. Yeah. And so, I probably ate and drank more and moved less because of COVID. Yeah. So it just knocked me off that perch, and I was pretty disciplined, and then I wasn't.
Okay. That's okay. How about Matty Jen?
No. I was walking twice a day, at least 5 miles each time. I needed to get out of my house because everybody was in my house when I used to have privacy. So I needed to move.
Okay. Matty?
Yeah, I don't think really have any gain or loss of any substantial amount, a few pounds maybe, and then wasn't a thing.
I was in an ulcerative colitis flare, so I had dropped 20 pounds from what I am now.
Whoa.
So I was horribly thin. So I'm always the opposite trend. It makes me so mad. When I was so sick and I looked horrible, I looked so gaunt and everything. Now that's the popular thing now because everyone's on Ozempic. And now that I look healthy, I don't look as like exciting and trendy anymore. And when I was super, super thin, everyone wanted to be curvy because now we're moving to the 90s, back to the 90s heroin chic. Yeah. So it's just, I can never win.
Well, people can't see everyone here, but everyone's, not me, is in great shape. So
you're in great shape too, Mark. You're in great shape too. 2020 hindsight. Are we in the new normal?
New normal has always stuck with me for many years. The new normal phrase has been around for as long as I can remember. I reserved all those domains around new normal because I liked it so much. But yeah, I mean, certain things have changed, clearly. I think what happened was a lot of trends that would have happened anyway were supercharged and happened faster. Retail stores were going to be diminishing because of online sales, but it happened in 2 years instead of 8. A lot of things happened like that. I mean, remote work was already happening a little bit. It wasn't like it was all new to everybody. That's why they were able to transition pretty quickly. It wasn't like I never heard of Zoom before that day, or the equivalent of Zoom. Maybe you didn't hear of Zoom, but you used something sometimes. So I think everything went faster, and we're in a place now that we would have not been in maybe for another 5 or 8 years.
I don't know if we're in the new normal, but I think we're in a period of some transition. Is our politics going to stay the way that it is? There's a piece of it that I think we're stuck in because national news organizations have realized that talking about the presidential election at all times is like this great thing. It's like one of the most so they just hammer it. And Trump presents this enormous target for discussion. If he were to be taken out of the picture, would we be quite in the same thing? I don't know. And then climate change, it's on the way on a scale that I think we're just not prepared for. So there's stuff about it that I think we're in the early stages of a very different period. So, I mean, I'm old enough to remember when life was simpler, to be honest with you. Life was less expensive. I keep bringing up how in my first job, I barely made any money, but I never thought about paying the rent because it was so inexpensive to live. And when I look at where my daughter is, who's 29 in New York, and it costs a fortune to get some crummy little apartment, I just think there's a bunch of factors that I think are reshaping our social life. Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you this. So I did an episode on my psychic predictions for this year. And I forgot to mention in that episode that one of the psychics that I listened to, who's an offshoot of Nostradamus and everything, had said, and by the way, he's not the only one who said it, that this decade is going to be the worst decade to go through. So we all have to just suck it up until 2031, basically, because it's just going to be a lot of change and a lot of uprooting. And I agree with that. Matty's laughing his ass off.
I'm just saying, kill me now.
Well, one big change that we're all experiencing is what we're doing right now, this ability to communicate in new ways. I've gotten in a relationship with somebody, at 70-something years age. You can communicate 24 hours a day with the touch of a phone. That just wasn't true before. And you can create these conversational platforms that you have at Radio Free Rancliffe. It didn't exist before. Our ability to communicate with one another has dramatically expanded. I don't think it's made us calmer or anything, but you can get a lot more.
So Mark does a lot of sexting all the time. It's okay. It's okay. Yeah. We love that. We respect that. So Mark, you had given me a great PR Newswire article that said 73% of companies cannot get employees back into an office setting. And this was recent. Yeah. Commercial real estate is still affected. The performing arts, Mark was saying, is still affected, trying to get people back. And I have a couple personal little things. I was never a lover of crowds before the pandemic, and now that's really cemented. I don't like it. And with the performing arts, I had went to see a comedian. It was a live podcast. I love this one comedian. And I usually can get her shows. She films the show and then you can buy it. later. So you don't have to be at the venue. And I like doing that. But I say, you know what the hell? She's in Red Bank, New Jersey. My family's in Red Bank. Let me go down there. I'll see my family. I'll see her. And I didn't like it. I liked her, but I didn't like the experience. Like, people were sitting next to me. They were crowded. They were coughing. I was not into any of that. So there's a comedian coming to Poughkeepsie that I like, and I'm not going to go see her. I'd rather live stream from my home and pay $20 and watch it when I want.
Well, I went to a movie last night, and there were like 5 people there. I went to a movie a week ago into one of these multiplexes, like 17 different screens, and there were maybe 50 people in the entire place. And I'm just thinking, this entire industry has to collapse. There's no way they can go on with this. So that's a big one. On the other hand, I went to a Broadway show this week, and you couldn't squeeze another person into that theater. So there's aspects of the performing arts that might survive because you have to go and see them. But if you don't, like you're talking about, I can wait till that film streams. That's a pretty big part of, at least for me, the performing arts. If you count film as part of that, I think that's going to be seen as the art form of our time, and it's got to go through a massive overhaul.
And that's something I really admire about you when I talk to you, Mark. You get out there, you're going to Broadway shows, you're going to movies, you're doing all this stuff, because I'm not that person. I am the lazy person that I just want to see it on the Netflix and the Hulu. And I know that's not good, but that's who I am at my core. So do you think that if another pandemic like this happens again and happens soon, can we go into lockdown again? Would people accept it again?
I don't think so.
Why?
I think that Trump and MAGA they've skewed whatever goodwill we had as a country, and I do not think that that's possible at all.
I agree with that. I think something happened. It's across the range of things, or a breakdown in acceptance of civic authority. But I think the fact that it became a dividing line, I'm either for Fauci or I'm against Fauci, that's kind of a stupid thing to be involved in, but it worked in a sense. It further polarized the population. So I do think some parts of the country would probably move somewhat in that direction, and other parts it would be almost impossible.
Yeah, there's a lack of trust in government that was accentuated during the pandemic, and there is an anti-science movement which has completely obliterated any sense that there is an authority on anything. So, yeah, we're in a really dangerous spot because there is going to be another pandemic. And when it happens, there'll be a large element of the country that has absolutely no trust in it, the CDC or any government agency.
Sad.
So it'll be like Sweden. I had a friend who was over in Sweden and endured the pandemic, and she told me about that there, where it was like everything hands off. So I wonder if it will be that. You guys reminded me of what I found crazy during the pandemic too, was how a mask became politicized. And this is not a political radio show. I just found that a little ridiculous. But unfortunately, we have to end this today. And we have to say goodbye to COVID Jesus.
Okay.
But first, Mark, is there anything, and I know what it is, but what would you like to promote?
Well, I would like people to sign up for the Hudson Valley Pilot if they haven't already. That's my number one thing that I'm working on. Listening to your podcast, but if they're listening now, tell your friends about it.
Thank you. That was so altruistic, as you always are. I was going to say the Hudson Valley Pilot is so great. I get so many of my stories from there. You guys know it. I always credit the Hudson Valley Pilot. Follow them on Facebook, Instagram, all the things. And also, I just want to say one more thing about the Pilot, and that is when you get that beautiful email newsletter from them twice a week, scroll down to the bottom and make sure you see the entire message, because then you can just see everything. So I like doing that as well. Mark, thank you for being a sunshine in this world and being my friend.
Wow, that's sweet. Thank you.
And you really have made an incredible, indelible mark on this town.
Wow.
And you are a generous human. And
can I do my sweet and sour? Or are we running out of time?
Yeah, let's do. All right. You know what, Mark? You're
I'll go
running the
fast.
show today.
Okay. So my sweet is I'm standing in the dry cleaners and I'm telling somebody about my trip to Paris. And someone says, oh, there's a really good bakery over in Kingston. And I'm not going to remember the name of the thing. So somebody has croissants at this little kind of whole earth bakery thing that's in Kingston that was really good. I got 2 of them and brought them back, and I was so astonished. My sour is Amtrak has just fallen apart. I was such a fan of Amtrak because I worked in Washington and Philadelphia. I was on Amtrak all the time. I have gotten stranded. The trains are always late. Somebody's got to fix Amtrak. It is falling apart. It is a mess.
Yeah, that shit's fucked up.
Yeah, wow.
And the outstanding croissant is in Kingston at Village Grocery and Refillery.
Good, I sent it to you.
Yes,
Thank you.
you
Okay.
did send it to me. And fuck you, Mark, for being able to eat gluten. I hate you. So on that note, to leave feedback on anything I've said today, I'd love to hear all of it. Agree with me. Tell Mark he's totally wrong. Whatever you want, call and leave a voicemail at 845-307-7446 or email me at comments@radiofreerhinecliff.org. This radio show is produced by me, Jennifer C., Matty Rosenberg, and Jen Hammoud at Radio Free Rhinecliff. Until next time, the next show will drop on Tuesday, March 19th. See you in 2 weeks. Love you, RBK.
Yeah.